I hope you enjoy this replay of my conversation with comic book artists John Jennings and Brian Moss. Since this conversation first aired, Jennings and Moss's careers have continued to skyrocket. Moss has worked with Marvel Comics, Cirque du Soleil, and Coca-Cola, among many other organizations. He curated the exhibition, The Black Panther, celebrating 50 years of Black superheroes for the King Arts Complex in Columbus, Ohio. His paintings have been featured in exhibitions at Harvard, among other institutions around the country. Jennings is a professor, New York Times best-selling author, graphic novelist, Harvard Fellow, and all-around champion of Black culture, as he proudly proclaims. Jennings' many acclaimed works include the Silver Surfer, Ghostlight series for Marvel Comics. In addition, Jennings designed this character, which he told me was inspired by Lady Wrestler, the documentary I made about African American women trailblazers in professional wrestling in the 1950s and 60s. Without further ado, here's my conversation with John Jennings and Brian Moss, celebrating Black creativity in comics. So, John, Brian, thanks again for making the time to speak with me and to talk about Black representation and animation and cartooning, and comics. So I appreciate you making the time.
Okay. No, thank you for
Thank you
having
for
us.
having us, Chris.
Yeah. So first off, so for people who may not be familiar, can you kind of talk about how you got into art and animation and kind of what inspired you?
Oh, okay. That's pretty easy. It was my mom. Yeah, my mom was a really, or is a really avid, reader, and she was actually a English major at Alcorn State University, and she met my dad there. Got pregnant with me, and then ended up moving back to Florida, Mississippi, with my grandparents. And this is like in late 1960s, like 1969 or so, about 1970. So I grew up like around a lot of books. I mean, I was kind of isolated, but I started reading really early, and she had all kinds of books laying around, including like a lot of books around like psychology and stuff like that. And I was really attracted to like images very, very early on. And I was really into like mythology, like Norse mythology, Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology. So my mom, in her infinite wisdom, she saw stuff like, Captain America and like Daredevil and Wonder Woman, because Wonder Woman was like essentially Greek mythology, right? And stuff like, the mighty Thor, for instance. And so she got those for me, and I just became really hooked on comics like real fast, and I was like into anything that looked like a comic book. So, like those old school like letter people comics, like Spidey super stories, anything that looked like an illustrated book or of any kind, I was really just attracted to images at a very early age. And then of course, growing up, that's like the golden age of like Saturday morning cartoons, man. I mean, we had stuff like Fat Albert and like the Mighty Orbots and like Dungeons and Dragons and Herculoids. I mean, it was crazy. So Hanna-Barbera was just, they were killing it back in the day. And then of course we had the afternoon cartoons like He-Man, and when I got into like when I was like in moving to high school, that was the first time I saw like I guess I guess it was anime, right? Robotech and Voltron and stuff like that. Battle of the Planets. These types of things. So I was like, watching all this, the G.I. Joe, Silverhawks, you name it. I was into all that stuff. And but even I was a big fan of Flintstones too. Hilarious, like it was hilarious. So yeah, so that's kind of like how I got started with it. I mean, and it just became a passion. I mean, I don't like do a lot of animation. I've done like designs for animated things, but the comic side of things, I just became totally obsessed with. Yes, like as soon as my mom got me that stuff, man, I was like, yep, this is the thing for me. So.
Wow. Brian, how about you?
Yeah, for me, I'm 10 years younger than John. So I was born in 81. And what's that, John, like 10, 11?
I love how you rub that in my face. Like, I'm much younger than this old part here. Anyway.
So like, it's funny though, because my earliest memories are like what you're talking about, John, like the cartoons, mainly Masters of the Universe.
Yep.
But it's pretty funny though. So like just to back up a little bit, I was into art around 5, 6. And then my mom threw me right into like, the programming for that. So like rec center type of art. So this might sound unbelievable to a lot of people, but I didn't see a comic or know about comics until I was like 10 or 11 years old. It
Mm.
was because the environment I grew up in didn't have that stuff. So it just was abstracted to me. The idea of Spider-Man was from like a hot air balloon, on the Thanksgiving Day parade. So a lot of people discover comics when they're like 2, 3, but for me it was like around 10, which is an interesting component because up until that point, for that previous 3 to 4 years, it was just all art. So I had a very traditional art upbringing. But then once I discovered a comic, I got hooked, right? Because that's like a feeding frenzy for like my imagination. So throughout my teenage years, that's when everything opened up. So you're talking like a lot of the independent animators came through at that point. You're like on Nickelodeon, so that would be like Ren and Stimpy, Rugrats, all that stuff. Liquid Television. What else was during that time? Beavis and Butthead. So a lot of that really independent animation was my first introduction to like something outside the norm. And then after that, it was like anime. So like Akira, Ghost in the Shell came out in the theaters around 96. I remember that was like a big deal. And like that's where everything kind of came to this like grand like apex, right? So I was like, I felt like I had every aspect of nerd culture uh in my arsenal at that point. So yeah, I would say probably by the time I was like 14, so that's like 94, that's when I discovered that package. So yeah, so ever since I've been doing it.
It's interesting. That makes sense to me because if you are starting, the time frame makes a lot of sense because what happens is, of course, the comics move from being ubiquitous in like newsstands and stop and goes and gas stations and stuff like that, and they move into these specialty shops, right? The direct market.
Mm-hmm.
Direct
Yep.
market starts in like about 78, 79 or so. And then of course everybody dials into it in the 80s,
Yeah.
And I remember that distinctly when the comics went away, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because they
Yeah.
used to be you could get like secondhand comics, the ones that they would rip the covers off of, and they put those and they bundle them up because they would resell them. Yeah, that they stopped doing that too, and so that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So basically what happened is that when they did that, because of your access point, you didn't get a chance to see them into the 90s, which totally makes sense, and
Yeah.
it's unfortunate, but yeah, interesting.
Right. Yeah. No,
And
oh, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
no, I was just gonna say, what do you think was the reason behind that? Why comics went into specialty shops rather than just being in newsstands and wherever you would buy other publications?
Well, I mean, what happens is it's a lot more consistent because before, you could actually be if you like trying to find like Superman number 53, right? And you're going to your newsstand or you're going to your stop and go, whatever, to find it, then you might not be able to find it until a couple of months later, or you'll find the next to last issue, and it'll just be all over the place. They didn't really have there really wasn't a consistent distribution network for comics, because they were considered to be like such low mediums. And so the gentleman, I forgot his name, that created the direct market, I think he was visiting DC Comics, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but it was like, late 70s or so. He goes to the DC Comics, offices, and he sees all these comic book covers, ripped off the covers. They were off the comics. They would rip them off because it would make them lighter to ship back. Because what happened was originally, like the comics market was very similar to the regular publishing market. Like when you don't sell books, retailers can send your unsold books back. But what's interesting about the direct market is that when a retailer buys comics, they keep them. You can't send them back. So it's a much more attractive deal for the comics publisher. So it was that too. But what happens is that because of this, both Brian and myself came up, financially challenged. So it's like, I grew up in the sticks, but but I grew up pretty poor, and Brian was in a financial situation too, right, in Columbus, right, and so
Mhm.
those particular stores weren't popping up in the sticks or the hood, so to speak. So that's what it was about access. So I think, but that's one of
Exactly.
it was a business decision though. It was a business decision. They consolidated it, and the big two, Marvel and DC, they signed on to it. It just made sense for them.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
I remember my first foray into a comic book shop. I was, when you're young, I was about, like I said, 10 or 11. I
yeah,
remember that was like the first time I walked out of my neighborhood. We all know that feeling, you
yeah.
know. And there was this place called, it was a laundromat, then a place called Collector's Corner. And I was just like, what is a Collector's Corner? And I go in and they have, well, it was just kind of like a multi, kind of like a head shop, but not a head shop, everything but that part. So it
Yeah.
had like porn, novelty things, and then comics at its own comic area.
Right.
And I was like, what? And it's funny that I went after the comics, right? And so I,
Makes
so you have
sense.
like all this stuff, and I mean it's even a different time, right? Because they wouldn't let a kid in that store today.
No,
But
no, yeah, that's
so you're right. So yeah, it was like I remember the comic too. It was like Marvel Comic Presents, and it had Sam Keith cover of Wolverine. It was like in 1991. So it was
oh,
like, oh, what's this thing? So I was hooked immediately.
that puts stuff into perspective, man, because I'm like, the first comics I was picking up, and not to like make it super comics heavy, but
No, you're fine.
when I'm going to like the stop and goes and stuff, in the mid 70s is when they had this thing called the Comics Code Authority, right? Where in the
Hmm.
1950s, comics were booming. They actually had like these, like in the middle of what they call the golden age. A lot of these comics after the Second World War were like horror comics and crime comics, and they were violent and messed up, but they were also morality tales actually. And Brian knows this very well, being that the
Hmm.
Eightfold Path is kind of
Right.
dealing with that, his book. Yeah, but these Senate subcommittee hearings, America's always been a very conservative country. It pretends that it's not, but it really is. And so they actually like made comics censor themselves, right? And so, but in the 1970s, I want to say like 77 or so, they changed those laws on comics. So they were actually able to do things that were a little bit more cutting edge and stuff, right? But then at the same time, that the Comics Code Authority only dealt with comic books and not with periodicals, right?
Mm.
So you would get these crazy lurid black and white magazines like Vampirella, The Rook, the Warren magazines like Creepy and Eerie, right? Which I was just totally addicted to. It's like these totally terrifying stories, not for kids at all, but they were uncensored, horror stories, right? And I was just really, really into that. And then of course, not to be outdone, right? Marvel, I want to say in the 1980s or so, they start stuff like Epic Illustrated because they're trying to compete with stuff like heavy metal, magazines like that. So like very beautifully produced adult fantasy magazines, And so I was reading all that stuff because my mom saw it. She didn't think it was. I mean, it was to her it was comic book. Like so, she. I just showed her the cover. It's like, oh, it's pretty, right? Yeah, you can buy it. Cool. Put down $1.50 or whatever it was. And I went home looking at like half naked elves and all kinds of
That's
all kinds of
amazing.
wild wizards and beheadings and
I love
out
it.
of control up in there. So, anyway, but yeah, so that's the thing though, because it was an illustrated book, she didn't distinguish between the medium, which I thought was really cool. So
So, what was each of your paths to becoming a professional artist and going into comics yourselves? I mean, creating comics yourselves.
I'll go ahead and go, John, I guess. For me, it was kind of my way out. So it was kind of like almost like a by any means necessary because I remember the art class vividly. I was around 8, and we had this thing on Fridays at Schiller Park in Columbus, Ohio, German Village. And it was this thing called Articipation. And what happened was that it took place on Friday, and then after the class, they were like, "Oh, hey, these like two guys in my class, they were brothers. They were like, oh, you want to come over and eat?" I was like, "Sure." We walk across the street into like a mansion, and I was like blown away. I'm like, wait, the people in my art class are like rich and they have mansions and they can eat. It was almost like the art world opened up to me because I realized by the art gave me access to a way out of my situation.
Mhm.
So it was kind of just like a do or die kind of situation almost. I was like fully convinced by the age of 7, 8 that I was going to go into art. And what that led to was me being really aggressive in the 90s. When I was like 14, 15, this would be 95, I started going to comic book conventions, trying to get jobs, which is kind of funny. I'm hopping on Greyhound as like a 14-year-old turning 15, going to Wizard, I think it was like Wizard World at the time.
Wow.
And all of my idols are there. And I'm like doing a trip, a 24-hour turnaround. So I'm leaving at like 4:35 in the morning, getting there by the time the convention opens. Out at the time it's out by the O'Hare Airport, and then I would go submit my portfolio, get contacts, all that stuff, and then head back to Columbus and just sleep on the Greyhound on the way back at like, it would be like 9 p.m., 10, and then I get back, 4, 3, go home. I was like, out in Chicago. I was like,
That's
well, I made
crazy.
some contacts. So that kind of gave me the confidence and it taught me a lot. And then when the internet came out, I had access to that. That's when it really changed because I knew all I had to do was sit and wait and develop my skill, and the internet would take care of the rest.
I love that. God bless the internet. No, it's funny because
Right.
I want to say because I started drawing at an early age, and like I said, I was the first thing you try to do is you try to copy things that you're into, right? So I think like when I was in the first grade, I was really into Popeye the Sailor Man. You know what I'm saying? I
Mhm.
just love that cartoon, and I think a lot of kids, it made me like, fall in love with spinach at an early age. Because I was like, you know what I'm saying? Like my mom was like, Mom, can
Yeah.
you eat some spinach? She's like, you want to eat spinach? I'm like, yes, I definitely want to eat spinach. Have you not seen this
No,
cartoon? Let me
I
tell you about
swear, John, I thought I was the only one who had that thought. I
no,
swear to God,
dude. I
bro.
mean, come on, like the spinach sales across the world had skyrocketed.
Yeah,
Anyway,
Right.
same
so
with me too.
see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
Totally.
Chris was eating all the spinach, right? So anyway, I tried to draw like my own like Popeye the Sailor Man comic book like when I was in the first grade, um, and then I think the next time I remember trying to make comics was it had to be like maybe the fourth or fifth grade or so, and that's when you start making knockoffs of your favorite characters, right? Like I combined like Tony Stark and the Master Kung Fu and the Black Panther into a character just called the Panther, right? I had a character. I was a
We got to
big
bring
daddy.
it back, John.
I was a big daddy. I know. Actually, there's a couple of characters I created. I was like, you know what? As I got older, I got better at creating characters. But when the other one, because I'm a big Daredevil fan, so I had this character called Devlin. You know, so I was doing stuff like that, and then I think around age 12 or so, I really started to look at like the comics and realize that wait a minute, this actually might be a job. I kind of understood what a job was to a certain degree, right? And my mom went to work and there was money happening somewhere, and it was consistent. And then when I looked at these comic books, I realized that there were people's names connected to these particular jobs, like his artists, Bob Layton, inker, Terry Austin, that kind of stuff, right? And I was like, oh, wait a minute,
Mhm.
these are jobs. These are actually like someone's doing this for a living. So I remember the day I told my grandma, I said, Grandma, I'm going to actually call my grandma Momo. I said, Momo, I'm so excited. I just discovered what I want to do. I want to be a comic book artist and I'm going to move to New York because I realized like all these things come out of New York because if you look at the indicia on the front page, it says where it's
Mhm.
published, right? That's what the address to Marvel Comics is on every comic, and just in the bottom part of the first page. And I was like, I'm gonna move to New York and I'm gonna draw comics. And I remember my grandmother like burst into tears, because she was so sad. She was like, "No, you can't leave." It was like, and I remember that was the first time I like really, really actively lied to my grandmother because I was like, "I'm so sorry. No, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not. I just made that up. I'm sorry. I was just teasing." But no,
But
I was trying to make
it's
comments.
funny though, if you think about John, because you're like really smart. They could probably see that really early on. You're super precocious, and the last thing they want you to do is become an artist, right? It's
Right,
like,
right, right. No, that's the thing.
no, rocket scientist,
No, but she wasn't.
attorney,
She just wanted. My grandmother didn't want
anesthesiologist.
me to go anywhere. My grandma wanted to be there with her. I was her favorite
Yeah.
child, and she just wanted me
Oh,
there. Right.
oh
That was
yeah.
the rest of that stuff is like, yeah. Anyway, so I went to the military first. So I always was good at art, but my mom, and she encouraged me, but she looked at it as a hobby, right? And like you said, Brian, I was pretty good at school, but no one ever really told me like, yo, you could go to college and become an artist. No one was saying that around me. And like, no one was saying like, hey, maybe you could be a graphic designer or, trying to figure out what kind of skills are connected to art, that kind of thing. Nope. My mom was like, you should be a doctor, a lawyer, or you could go to the military and retire, but you can't be an artist. You're going to cut your ear off and die in a box. It was kind of like that. And I was like, she actually like conflated like Basquiat and like Van Gogh. You know what I'm
I
saying?
love it.
Anyway, yeah. So I went to the military, and I was in an accident, and when I was on maneuvers at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and I broke my foot really badly, and I had to have reconstructive surgery on it. And they were like, "Yo, we can't train you anymore, dude. Get out." And I was like, "Okay." And then but then because Jackson State, a lot of HBCUs, their entry points, like their admission guidelines, a lot of times they're deep into the summer. Like you can actually still apply to school in August, that kind of stuff, right? So I was like laid up, with my foot all jacked up in a medical hospital, in a military hospital. And I reached out to Jackson State University, and I actually was able to get a scholarship, because I was valedictorian of my class. And um, at the time, like East Florida High School, it was mandatory to take the ACT, and I did really well on it, but I still went to the military. No one was still like, hey, dude, maybe you should think about going to college. It just, anyway, no detracting from the military at all. It's just that it wasn't the space for me. And then I went to Jackson State University, and I majored in commercial art with a minor in drawing. And I was in honors college there, the W.D. Du Bois Honors College. Full ride. What's crazy is how much my scholarship was for 4 years at Jackson State.
They about to really know how old you are, John.
Oh, it's crazy. How much y'all think?
What year would this have been?
You know what? You're really close, actually. You're the closest, Chris. $16,000.
Wow.
4 year ride, room and board.
Oh,
16 grand. I know, right? Anyway, so when I was there, I actually started making. I started making like flyers for frats and sororities, stuff like that, for parties and things like that. So I actually became like a little entrepreneur when I was on campus. And then I worked for the school newspaper, the Blue and White Flash. I was the comics guy. I did like illustrations and stuff. And then I got like, I managed to get an internship at the local news, like the big time newspaper in Jackson, Mississippi. And then, they offered me a job, but I still was like really into art. I was really curious, I had a very curious mind. So I ended up going to grad school. And that's kind of like how I ended up going into education, because I really liked knowledge, and I was like really into like, well, maybe I could teach art, and so I got my first master's in art education, and then I finished in 97 with my MFA in studio art, with a focus on design. So that was kind of like the path that led me to where I am now. And then from then on, I just kept pushing. So after I got my MFA, I ended up coming back to Jackson, Mississippi, and I started their graphic design program at Jackson State. So, and I was there for 4 years, and blah blah blah. Rest is history. Anyway, let me know if you want to know more. I'm gonna stop talking. But that's it's been a really. Basically, I've been a professor since I was like 27, and I've been I'm 51 now, and so I've been teaching for a long time. This is my fourth post as a professor. I don't teach art anymore. I actually teach media studies now. But for 20 years, I was a design professor,
So it kind of sounds like you kind of just had to find your own path. And it's interesting that you chose the military because it's like you were determined to get out one way or another. I mean,
I had to get out of
you lied to
Florida.
your grandmother, she said you weren't going anywhere, but then you choose the
I
military.
had to go to Florida. I mean, I had to get out of Florida, man. But yeah, it was, I mean, it seemed everybody was leaving, all my friends were going. And actually, other thing too, like a lot of my friends went to the military, like all my best friends were going to the service, most of them, and then another one of my best friends, he just started working right out of school. So this is still actually a time when you can actually get out of school and get a good job with just a high school diploma, what I'm saying, actually, believe it or not. And so, so he worked at this battery company. And then later on, he ended up starting his own painting company, what I'm saying, like, so painting, doing like really big contract work, just painting, buildings and stuff. So, but most of the people in my hometown, there's a lot of people that went to the military, and there was a boom around that area too. I just missed that Desert Storm, by the way.
Mm.
Yeah, I just missed it. Yeah, so my accident was, like I said, in like 89 or so. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Once you got into college, was there an advisor who kind of steered you on which major you should take, or was it just kind of like your own research and deciding what your interests were?
That's a really good question. So when I went to Jackson State in undergrad, I was part of, like I said, the honors college, and Dr. Maria Luisa Alvarez Harvey was the dean, and she personally met with all of her students. The dean of the honors college met with you and went over your schedule with you. God rest. She's one of the most amazing women I ever met. She just passed away not too long ago, but she was like another mother to me, and was extremely hands-on with making sure that all of her students, took the right classes and did the right things. And we're talking about a woman who came up from Mexico, taught herself how to speak English and excelled on every level, and brought her family over, from Mexico. It's just incredible, amazing woman. So yeah, so we were very fortunate that was happening. And yeah, and then also we had people like Dr. Anderson Macklin, who at the time was my department chair. He actually was very instrumental in me and my friend Chalmers going to graduate school, so, and that's how we ended up at grad school. We didn't even know what grad school was. We were like, wait, there's more school? We're like, hold up, wait, what you mean what? But we just did 4 years. What are you talking about?
Right.
Hilarious. Anyway, but the thing is, though, is that when I went to, at the time, Jackson State was still severely underfunded. This is actually before the Ayers case. The Ayers case, Mississippi basically determined that all the HBCUs in Mississippi were being egregiously underfunded according to racialized lines, and and so after that, of course, there was a windfall of money and stuff. Before that, we were just like, we didn't have any money. And it was like about 10,000 students on the campus total. When we did a tour of University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and our little country minds were like blown open. There was like, we had just never seen that kind of money. I was like, oh my God, this campus is, I'm tired walking around this campus. What the hell is going on? It was crazy. Like, so I remember going into their student union. No, was it a union? No, their bookstore. I remember going to the campus bookstore at U of I, and their bookstore was bigger than our entire campus union. I was like, where am I? But I knew I wanted it, though. That's the other thing too. Like, once I knew it was there, I wanted it. So yeah.
How about you, Brian? What was your path to?
Yeah, so actually it's great that you asked that question, because it's a little bit of an outlier, So originally, when I graduated, I was pretty much couch surfing, and then I moved in with my sister, high school, that is. Born in, like, I just went to school, public school in Columbus, so born and raised on the South End, South High School graduate, 99. Now, the following year, I was like, okay, I'm gonna get everything, like get my weight up, get everything together, So then the following year, I was like, I'll apply for school. So in 2000, I applied for CCAD, and this isn't a knock towards the school, but I got there and I realized that it was mainly because I saw because of my peer group. Um, I felt like I was around a lot of kids, which because I was pretty serious, you know what I mean? I thought art was a serious thing. And then I get to college and it's like they're like it's like just goofing off and stuff. And
Mhm.
I never really that never really took to me well. So I immediately like unenrolled. And then I went across the street and I had to work at the art museum because my father worked there prior. So I was very familiar with the art museum. And I would say that was like my tenure. I did about 20 years, started out in security, you know, it's a low level job. And when I left, I ended up working in the curatorial department and the learning department. So that means I'm like archiving Amina Robinson stuff. And then I'm also doing educational programming, which that pivoted me into teaching at universities. So that would include lectures and stuff like that. And then I taught at CCAD for a few years, and that was for their adult programming. And then ever since then, like something I'm doing right now currently is I'm actually doing the art programming, developing the programming for the summer schools for the Columbus City schools. So it's kind of like I brute forced my way into that system to where they're paying me versus me paying them going to school. So just because of the work through my CV and also connections, I have to give a lot of like props to John in that case. So John put me in Harvard a couple of times, I think, a few Harvard shows. So stuff like that actually like I'm here and they're like, oh, you have a art at Harvard. Hey, do you got time to teach? You know, like they pay attention to you real quick. So it was just through hard work, really. But it was more about the discipline, right? And that's the shared experience with on that collegiate level is that I worked during that time where I left CCAD and spent my time at the art museum. That I couldn't ask for a better like school of learning because you're learning art history, contemporary. I handled art that people would never believe that I touched. You know what I mean? In the sense of like, you know, curating and everything. And so it's one of those things that you can't get in art school. And so with my discipline, multidiscipline, so that would be painting and comics. And when I say comics, that also includes animation and everything underneath that umbrella. So that really kind of like throughout the course of time really helped me to become who I am today in the sense of my path I have now, you know, the success I have for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, so we all grew up, where, there were maybe Black characters here and there, but I mean, it wasn't a lot of, there wasn't something, Black Panther didn't, the movie version didn't come out until 2018. So there was, and there was Blade back in the 90s, the movie version. But I mean, there wasn't something that was like a huge representation of African Americans in comics. Did you ever come to like a realization like, hey, there's like a dearth of representation of people who look like me, or was it sort of not even a conscious thought of when you started going into creating comics?
That's a good question. It's funny because I grew up in Mississippi where like, racism is like stewed to perfection. So it's like, this is delicious racism. It's like perfectly seasoned. Yeah, it's part of like everything. So I grew up like in the shadow of Emmett Till. You know what I'm saying? My mom, I remember the first time I saw those photos in Jet magazine, like they still were reprinting them and stuff. So, the notion of race and constructions of race started to seep in at the edges, I think, at a young age. But I really didn't get super politicized about representation until I went to graduate school, because up until that point, we were ubiquitous. You know what I'm saying? I went to HBCU, so it was like Jackson State. It's like 99.99% Black. Everybody Black. It was crazy. And I went to a, even though, this was post civil rights era, school system, we were still segregated. Like all the white people in my little town, like the children of the people that owned the land, which are the white people, right, in the country. And so they went to this place called Tri-County Academy, right? So, I didn't really see or hang out with white kids until there was and I hate to say it, this kid is probably a serial killer now because because Alan Shoemaker was his name. And sorry, but he came in and he was working class. It was probably, poor white kid, and was tiny and was like brutally teased by everybody, which took a lot of heat off of me because to that point, I was actually brutally teased by everybody. So because I was the poor like country bumpkin smart kid nerd art guy, right? Anyway, so yeah, I didn't think I thought about like constructions of identity until I went to grad school, and that's why I realized like, wait a minute, now I understand why we're calling minority. Wait, hold up. And so when I started seeing that they weren't teaching black history, like black art history, like when I was going to grad school, I was like, noticed like there was no trace of anything that actually spoke to the fact that there were black artists. Like there was no teaching of the Harlem Renaissance, and this is stuff that I had to learn. Like when I went to Jackson State, I had to take like a couple of classes on African American art history. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I really don't think until like the 90s when like Milestone Media is jumping off, and then of course you have this this outpouring of black independent comics like Brother Man and like Tertiary on Lead, coins the phrase the black age comics, and he starts the first like black convention, and then of course you have stuff like ANIA, which is like 6 different publishers fused together into one publishing entity, right? Yeah, and then of course you have stuff like the LA Phoenix on the West Coast that David O'Brien is doing, right? And then you have like these black independent comics, and there was like there was a cultural awareness of like black independent art and stuff. So of course you have like the black independent like film movement in particularly LA area. I think it's called, I forgot the name of it though at the moment. But yeah, but it was a black indie film movement. And then also of course you had like there was black sitcoms and stuff like that, and of course you had like gangster exploitation, so it was like black folk everywhere. So it was a very different time, and yeah, and I got politicized around it, and I actually wanted to work for Milestone, and I remember I finally like got a chance to like I put together like a little portfolio. I want to say it was like 94, something like that, 95. I forgot when they stopped publishing, but it was around the same time. And everybody's like, oh, well, they're not publishing anymore. And I'm like, what? So I actually still have those pages actually. I want to go back and ink them in color.
John, you gotta post them, dude. That'd be awesome.
I think I might have posted like the drawings, but it's like I think they're terrible personally, but I might ink them in color them just to see what happens.
That'd be sweet.
maybe I'll end up working for Milestone,
You could bring back Milestone. How about that?
But they're already back.
Oh yeah. Well,
they're already back. They didn't shoot. They just they beat me
yeah.
too.
I started looking up the shop recently.
Yeah, they're great actually, and they just announced that Blood Syndicate's coming back, and this new comic book called Duo is coming back too. So
Oh, cool.
They're back. Anyway, so yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting because growing up in that environment, and like when I discovered comics, that kind of opened everything. But one thing a lot of people know about me is I'm actually biracial. So my mom's white, my dad's black. And so for me, it was always this world of duality. So it's like it's almost speaking a foreign language, honestly. So I could see, like, I would be like with my my black friends, it'd be like, I would notice something and they wouldn't even pick up on it, that like, that guy is racist, you know what I mean? Because like I've seen it before when I would be with my white friends, on the other side. So it's just like almost a foreign language that I picked up. And what happened was that everything John described was like things that I discovered in my childhood, meaning like Spawn and all these kind of characters, these reinventions. Brother Man, like I remember that would be at the shop too. Like you would get all that stuff was there. Same way with the film, So you're thinking like John Singleton, all that stuff, Spike Lee. So I was just fully immersed in that. So between like 89 and like 97, I would say, it was like magical to me. Like all I knew was like all this black cool stuff. And then so what happened though is like going back to that thing where I traveled to Chicago to try to get jobs and stuff. I was offered jobs from people in Chicago because it's like I'm coming off the Greyhound. It's like predominantly black area. But then I would go to these comic conventions and the editors were all white. And so they would like give me feedback. It was actually like would be considered positive feedback, but I took it personal because I'm like, yo, you don't know my experience. Like, what do you know? You don't have more experience than me. Later on, they know clearly they do more, right? But it was one of those things where it's like kind of like a punk rock attitude, it's like, no, I'm gonna do it. So it was a very brute force approach. So the characterization of black superheroes for me was always there. It was never like a peripheral thing or a thing that came after me. And then you have to remember Boondocks, right? That was huge for me because that's me turning like 18, 19. I was looking at those books at the library, and then all of a sudden there's this anime version that I couldn't even like wrap my head around. So for me, it was always a supportive black process. I never veered from that, honestly. So developing the style though is what counts. So like when I would develop my like skill set, it's weird because it comes across like this European painting style, but then like I can like flip it and do like things, tap into like my childhood and extract things, visual language that's like, more susceptible to like, my black side. So it's almost as if that language that I'm speaking from both sides can like cross pollinate now. So it's always been there, and I've always held on to it because of I knew how valuable it was, So it's something I never let go of.
Yeah.
So did you all start working together through SoulCon, the Brown and Black or Black and Brown comic expo, or you had known each other before that or outside of that? Or
John, I can speak to exactly when we first met because I probably remember better than you do because you knew a lot of people. Yeah, so you guys came to Columbus. You came to CCAD. It was you and Stacy. This would have been earlier mid 2000s, and you guys were on a panel with Victor Dandridge.
Yep.
And if you remember that, I remember after the event because I know Victor, and then I remember Stacy asking me like, "What kind of camera you got?" It was like a Nikon. He was like, "Use the other camera," and so then it was like, "Oh yeah." Then we connected. So that would have been, I think, around 2010 at the latest.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how long I've known John, but John can speak to the rest of our relationship.
Yeah, I'm like, I think the first time we actually like, so was
Chopped
that
it up.
we met online?
Yeah. Well, the event was in person. You guys were here in person, so this.
Yeah,
is
no, that's what I'm saying. But
then we chopped it up online.
Okay.
Yeah. And then when CXC SoulCon came around, that was you're already family by that point. So
yeah,
we
were already kind of like talking online and stuff and like emailing each other about projects. Yeah, because what happened was I remember Brian had posted some artwork and I was like, and I just hit him on, I just hit him in his direct messages. I was like, yo, I really love your work. And, and I think that's probably when we exchanged emails and things. And then he sent me this monster.
And Brain was part of that connection too.
Brain was part of the connection too. Yeah, David Brain. Yeah. So, because I knew that I was, because I don't think we were actually, Facebook friends at the time, but because of the fact that you were friends with other people like Victor and David, you would be in my thread, you know what I'm saying? So that's how I remember that. So, and so what happens is like, he sent me like, we collaborated on a monster image actually. And he sent me this monster that I colored and he was like excited about what I did with the colors. And so it's like, so we just started talking about ways to collaborate, and that's how we became friends. And, since then we actually have worked on some comics together. He's been in like a lot of shows we've done, it's been really kind of like we've been collaborating for a long time actually. So,
it's funny when we look back at it actually.
Yeah, you don't really think about it. It's so natural. You're like, oh, wait a minute. It's been like a decade. It's been like a decade.
Right. It's like almost, it's probably over. But it's kind of cool because like obviously like John is like big bro, but it's also like a mentorship. And it's one of those things where you really need that aspect. And it's like, but almost it's coming in with like respect, right? So it's like, I'm not going to rely on John because that's not fair to him. But at the same time, it's like he put me on game and put me on projects. So it's one of those things where no different than my other mentors. It's like they changed my life, so I don't have to like work as hard. You know what I mean? In the sense I can actually express my creativity versus like having to like struggle work. You know what I mean?
That's the thing. It's like I think you're supposed to, once you get to a spot and you see that people are really wanting to work hard and get into the space, then I feel it's your duty to do that. You know what I'm saying? And so, that's one of the things. Like, this guy is really talented and he's hungry and there's opportunities, so you try to like make as much space as possible. I think that's what I've kind of dedicated a lot of my career to, actually. Just trying to be, I just wanted to be the being in other people's lives that I didn't necessarily have, what I'm saying, or I struggled to find.
I think it's great that you mentor people like that, John, because a lot of people are like, well, I got mine, now you get yours, or see people as, competition rather than somebody that you can collaborate.
Potential collaborators.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, to me, it's like, oh, you dope. We need to work together.
Right.
Instead of being like, oh, you're gonna take what's mine. I was like, that's yeah.
It's funny. It's funny because that scarcity mindset, like in Columbus, Chris, you might be able even to attest to this. It's like in the 90s and the early 2000s, it was heavy with this like compartmentalizing or separation, like this is mine, don't step on my turf. And I was always like hurt by that because I was always like a step back because, I'm into like anime and all this other weird stuff. And so like in the art world, they're just like painting gurus and masters. So it was a lot of gatekeeping. So then I was like, man, when I get older, I'm not going to do that to anyone. So like by the time I connected with John, I ended up changing the game in Columbus with the art because I started putting on younger artists.
Yeah.
And so it was just one of those things where, it's a trickle up and a trickle down at this point. So it's beautiful.
No, I agree.
So when you all collaborate, is it just kind of an organic process where John, you have an idea and you think, oh, this would be great to work with Bryan on this, or vice versa? Or
it is kind of like that, actually.
It's probably the easiest. It's the easiest partnership ever, honestly.
Right. I just, I know that whenever I could think about that Bryan's going to flip it, he's going to add his narrative style to it, and it's about trust. You know what I'm saying? Collaboration. You got to trust the people that you work with, understand and respect them, and be like, I realize like there's no I in team. I know that's really cliche, but that's not how you spell team.
There is me. There is me though. There is me, but
yeah, that is a good point. That is a good point. But yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like it was always funny because I always like things that are natural, like the progress of things, because it's like you have to inject some sort of personality. But a thing I learned from John was patience, a lot of patience, because it's not, I can like make a book in a week and get out and sell it. And it's like, no, that's not how the industry works. It's like these things take a very long time and you just have to gain momentum. Like sometimes year after year. We started a project in 2018. It's just like late 2018, 2019. It's just now coming out next month.
Right. Right. Yeah,
like,
it's a very because we're like, well, I mean, another cliche, we're like speedboats, right? And they're like ocean liners. So, because everything has to be lined up. And of course, COVID, it would have been COVID and all the different shipping issues around COVID have helped destroy some of the infrastructure there too. So, we had some help there, but that's but Bryan's right though. It's like it's always a long game,
Yeah.
Like for instance, with our publisher, I mean, for them a hit really is, I mean, of course everybody wants to sell out of books, right? I mean, the Eightfold Path comes out, they'd be ridiculously happy if it sold out, right?
Oh, that'd be awesome.
It'd be great. But honestly, for them, like just for their what they need, for their metrics. If they sell half the books, that's a win, right? And then what happens is the rest of those get sold to schools and libraries, which is why they do hardcovers to start with. So they're looking at like these larger bulk orders, something like the Eightfold Path is teaching Buddhism, that could be picked up in religious studies classes, stuff like that. So that's the kind of way that they're thinking about selling things. It's very different than like, hey, I made a comic book, let's sell it on the corner. It's a very different mentality,
Right.
Yeah. But I want to tell you one thing too. I want to do a shout out to this kid named Eduardo right quick. So when the comic books went away, I just want to backtrack for a second. When the comic books went away, I was very sad. Obviously, couldn't go to the Stop and Go anymore. But my Uncle Willie just passed away. He's actually one of the only artists I knew, who got me started drawing.
Sorry for your
He was
loss.
dating. He was. What did you say?
I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you. I appreciate that. He was dating a woman named Alice at the time, and Alice had a son named Eduardo. And remember, they lived in the big city of Jackson, Mississippi. And so Eduardo was kind of like, he was cool, but he was kind of like, who is this country kid, But he was in the comic books really big. He was really big in the comic books. And I remember like having conversations about comics. He had literally hundreds of comics because he lived very close to one of the direct market stores. Like I think it was a Star store or something like that. So he had comic books I had never seen before though. And it was outside of Marvel and DC because again, in the 80s, you had like an uptick in the independent comics, right? So you had stuff coming up from Eclipse Comics and stuff like that. And this kid had wide sci-fi taste. Like his taste was like wide as mine. And his mom made him give me half of his collection because she was going to toss it. And he begrudgingly did it because he would rather have someone who loved the comics like he did. It was either give them to me or they're going to go in the garbage. Half of his collection.
That's insane.
Which I thought was a good, because usually the mom throws away all the stuff, right? So I inherited, she's like, right? I thought that was really, you got to give away half these books because it's too much, I have this, it's really crazy. I have the same conversation with my wife now. It's like, you are not buying any more books. Ever.
It's a good
baby, I'm in publishing. I'm a publisher. People send me books for free. What's wrong with you? As many, all kind of shoes could come up in here, but anyway. So that's because of that. That it was an act of kindness too, because he could have probably been a brat about it and complained enough that he could keep them or hid them somewhere, or maybe gave them to someone.
Right, exactly.
One of his friends, so he could still visit his comics, But but he gave them to me. He gave them to me. It had to be like 500 comics, and it was stuff like
gosh.
Miracle Man, stuff like Sunrunners, DNA Agents, like stuff I had never seen before. I was like, what are these comics, And stuff from Britain, 2000 AD comics and stuff like that. I was like, what is this, right? And it just changed the way I looked at comics, honestly, And then I want to say like another thing that happened was like, and then I couldn't afford them. I couldn't buy any new comics, so I would, but you could get the free Bud Plant, the Bud Plant,
the catalog.
So I would sit off with a catalog and I would just drool over what comics I couldn't read. So it would be stuff like Love and Rockets, and like I didn't know what Watchmen was that looked cool.
Red Sonja was
Red Sonja. It was stuff like the Flaming Carrot, stuff like that. So anyway, so I just want to make sure, that actually, those particular things changed the way I looked at comics, And
he literally changed your life.
It
didn't
literally
realize
changed my
it was
life.
just something his mom made him do.
Yeah, and I don't know where that kid is, if he's still alive or not. I hope he is and thriving, because Eduardo, you changed my life, man. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah.
So can you describe the project your collaboration is coming out next month and where people can get it and all that?
Go, Brian.
Yeah. So cool. So yep. So the book comes out definitively now, March 22nd. I'm confident about saying that. Is that correct, John?
Yes, that's correct. Mark 22nd. It got pushed back
because
of shipping issues. Yeah.
Yeah.
So everything is getting pushed back because of shipping issues.
Yeah.
So it's Steve Barnes and Charles Johnson are the writers. John put this together. So it's under Megascope, which is an Abrams public imprint that John created. So when John came up with this concept, he initially spoke to me about collaborating on this book called Eightfold Path. So I got the script, and what John described to me, he said, Brian, you can draw a lot of different styles, which like is my thing. That's what I like to do. And it was like, do that in this book. So that's kind of like putting gasoline on like a bomb, just like pure chaos. It's like, what, I could do my thing? Like, really? So what happened is that throughout the course of the book, It took about 6 months to do,
Mhm.
and it took a team. And I'm super proud of this book. It's 8 different stories, and it's called The Eightfold Path. And with the Eightfold Path, it's this path to enlightenment, a Buddhist philosophy. And I'm describing it horribly, but I'm doing my best, guys. And so what? So John will be able to like piggyback and edit all of my phrasing. So anyway, so in this book, it's 8 different stories, and then that tells you about hardships, whether it's through the author's vision or through the author's imagination. And so you'll get stories with like kung fu fighting. You're gonna get stories of sci-fi, futuristic zombies. You're gonna get alt planet sponge monsters. So it's almost just like a celebration of ideas. And I guess that's the best way to word it. And then if you can get something like out of it that connects to you, then that's what the book is supposed to give to you. So I see it almost as like a mantra or a prayer almost. It's the first time I ever experienced that with a comic, so I'm really proud of it. And this is my first major publication, so I'm super proud of it being my first like out the gate book, because I could have done books in the past. Like I've been given opportunities since 20 roughly, and I always declined them because I always wanted my like something like this to come up. And so when I had this opportunity, I was all over it. So John, do you have any other thoughts or things to add?
Oh yeah, yeah. So the Eightfold Path was on the original pitch for Megascope. You know what I'm saying? So when I brought the idea to Abrams as a potential book line, Stephen Barnes for a long time, once Samuel Delany had retired, was like one of the only voices in science fiction that happened to be Black, right? So he used to write for the Outer Limits. He wrote for the Twilight Zone from the 80s, stuff like that. He's married to Natalie Dew, who is like legendary like horror writer. So they're like a amazing. I actually have a book with them together too, actually, which is coming out I think next season. So anyway, Charles Johnson, of course, is MacArthur Genius Grant winning, Guggenheim Fellowship winning, National Book
The
Award.
man.
This dude, he's only the second Black person to win a national book award. And that was since the most, but he was the second African American to win the National Book Award. The first was Ralph Ellison,
Wow.
who was in the audience when he got the award. I know,
Amazing.
it's crazy.
Holy
It's put his
cow.
book called Middle Passage, actually, which we're also adapting into a graphic novel with Dennis Cowan and Reggie
Read
Hudson.
that.
Yeah,
It came out in the early 90s, right?
that's correct. Yeah, 90.
Yeah,
1990. Yeah, so we're
Yeah,
adapting.
I remember reading it as a kid, John.
Yeah,
So
Reginald
I
Hudson.
was like in fifth grade, fifth
Well,
or
you would
sixth
have been.
grade.
That's right. Yeah, but it's a great
Mhm.
book. So yeah,
Yeah, it's incredible.
Dennis Cowan is drawing that book. It's crazy. Anyway, so what happened was they wanted to work together. Charles is a practicing Buddhist, as Brian stated. It really is kind of like what they're doing is they have this thing. It's called via negativa. This idea of like teaching positive ideas through showing negative things. So it's basically like they're all morality tales. And so what they were very inspired by was the EC comics like Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror and stuff like that. So which are anthology books from the 1950s that would use horror and science fiction, dark fantasy to teach morality, and where basically like, the evildoers were always punished, you know what I'm saying? So when I pitched this idea, I had to think it was like Afrofuturist Buddhist Canterbury Tales.
or you know what it sounds like is the Grimm's fairy tales.
It actually has a grim, and also
Yeah.
shows like it also has like a feel of like the Arabian Nights as well,
Mhm.
So because or Ray Bradbury's The Illustrated Man, where it's like a bunch
Exactly.
of like, connected stories, and yeah. So basically, what happens is like there's these 8 travelers, and they come together in this cave. They're on their way to see this holy man, in the mountains, and they're stuck there. And then there happens to be an attendant who was expecting them in the cave, and so they have to tell stories, and each story is connected to one of the noble truths that are connected to the Eightfold Path to Enlightenment. So it's teaching Buddhism, but through like wild ass like horror and And then you have like Brian's like beautifully abstract, style, bold style that actually links it all together. We just actually a critic, Adam McGovern, just said like it was just such a bold singular vision, even though it was like a collage of like different ideas. So it's a wild book. It's not going to be for everybody, but I wanted to push the boundaries as far as like curatorial work. I said, okay, well, this is a really, really high concept book. It should be something special and something beautiful, and I think that we brought our A game in that regard. So yeah, March 22nd hits the stores.
I'm super proud of it. It's definitely the hardest project I ever had to do, because what happened, Chris, is that it is a learning curve for me, because I'm used to just this independent route. And so when I had to, and I worked in professional settings, I'm not like some wild artist or nothing like that. I don't want to get it misconstrued. But what happens is that during that process, I get the script, and this is no reflection in like Abrams. This is literally like the process of the game of book publishing I learned. It's like, it's hard. So I had to like do all the layouts for the book, and then insert the lettering so that they can have that as a package ready, so that when I do the art, all they have to do is insert art over what the letterer recreated, meaning like the word bubbles and everything. So that being said, that was like the first 3 months. And during that time, while doing that, I brought in a crew of artists from Columbus, and they're credited in the book. So I'm really proud of that aspect, because I was handling it almost like a mixtape, or kind of like how Kanye produces albums. He'll just bring in 60 producers. Like it's not, and so he almost divorces himself. So you're actually letting people do like these micro expressions. Some artists actually did bigger expressions. So because I was like, hey, how about you do the layout so I can like see how that looks, and then I could put my style on top of that. So it's almost as if they're making the beat and then I'm the rapper. Or like we could flip it.
Really
and
great.
It's like,
allegory.
Yeah, thank you, John. So it's like what you're going to see is like obviously a technical like prowess through it. So when you look at the book, it's like every panel is important. It's nothing where you're getting a like a mid, like you're not getting mids. It's like everything hits. Every panel, every page is a expression of art. It's like I'm challenging compositions and stuff like that. So I really want people to like really focus on a lot of those aspects when they're reading it, because there's a lot of intention behind every panel, and there's nothing in there that's like wasn't intentional. So I just want everyone to be celebrated and get their credit. And so when you look at that book and you check out one of the stories, you're like, oh, that's pretty dope. Like you'll see the credit and you're like, oh, I really like that person's stuff. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to put a highlight on that.
Awesome. And if people want to follow you and keep up with your work, what's the best ways? Do you have social media handles or a website where people can check your stuff out?
Yeah,
Yes.
Mine is going to be, oh, sorry, go ahead, John.
No, you go first. You were speaking.
Okay, yeah, mine is really short. Mine is Strange Things Moss. That's my Instagram. My email is strangethingsmoss@gmail.com. I reply to both of those. I apologize if there's like tardiness or lateness, because I'm just really busy right now. So yeah, hit me up or follow. I always like meeting new people.
And for me, you can find me at johnjenningsstudio.com, all one word. And you can find, if you go to contact section, you can see like my agents contact, for speaking and for doing like image making for like advertising and such. And also, I am also on Instagram, and that is John Jennings Art, all one word. And Twitter is J.I. Jennings, because my middle name is Ira, actually.
Oh, cool.
Wow, right?
Yeah, I really like that.
So yeah, this has been great, man. I had a lot of fun. And it's funny because I feel like, because all of us are so tired, we actually
and I'm actually, I could actually speak to you all for hours. I'm actually about to go do a talk at the this local library about lady wrestlers. So I'm
oh yeah, dude.
Yeah.
Oh man, thank you so much for that film,
Yeah.
dude. I wanted to tell
Oh,
you.
it's incredible, John.
I love it.
Great job on that, Chris.
I bought it on Amazon, and so check it right quick, man. So I'm doing a story right now. You familiar with this character called Phantoma?
No, I'm not.
She was one of the first like superheroines, right? She was this beautiful blonde white woman who lived in Africa, and I know it's
Like
19.
Queen of the Jungle.
Carl
She's kind of a Queen of
Baker.
the Jungle character, but check it out. But what's different about her is that she, like a lot of those jungle characters, they protected Africa's resources, which is always really interesting to me. So you have these white,
Yeah.
like, you know, like the Phantom was like, get up out of Africa, right? And so basically she would do this thing where people were trying to poach from Africa. She would turn into this hideous blue skull-faced creature, and she had powers like, you know, the character the Spectre from DC Comics.
Yeah.
She had almost like unlimited power. So basically she said, don't take those diamonds. And if they take the diamonds, she would turn into a scorpion and sting you in the face. It was crazy, whatever. You know, it was just, it was nuts. So me and my friend Damien and David Bryan, we're doing this, like, she's a public domain character. So we did a version of her, and I was influenced by your film. So I turned her into a lady. I turned her into a black lady wrestler.
That is an honor, John. Wow,
Yeah,
I am
she's
beyond
a wrestler.
Wow.
I'll send you an image of her.
I would love that.
Yeah, I turned her into like a kind of like female luchador, and so she's a monster wrestler. Yep.
What an honor. Wow.
Yeah.
If you like this video, please leave a comment, share it, and subscribe to my channel.